I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Lancaster County Planning Commission of January 9th, 2019. A printed agenda is available outside of the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, is available at the front of the chambers with the clerk. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors at the back of the room. If you parked in the parking garage across the street to the north, the gate is open and no parking coupons are needed today. And out of courtesy for those attending this meeting, the commissioners and the staff, cellular phone usage is not permitted in these chambers during any portion of this meeting. We will appreciate your cooperation. Please note that the Planning Commission action today is final on the following agenda items. Item 1.1B, Special Permit 18041. Item 1.3B, Special Permit 872J. And item 1.4, Special Permit number 18003A. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council or the County Board by filing a notice of appeal with the clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission action on all other items today is a recommendation to the City Council or the County Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held December 12th, 2018. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. Washington.
Campbell.
Thank you. Campbell? Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
And Shear.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request from someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Amy to read all of the consent agenda items into the record, and once those items are read, she will ask if there is anyone wishing to speak. If you wish to speak on an item on the consent agenda, we would ask that you stand and state that item. That item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Amy, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Yes, thank you. Today's consent agenda is item 1.1A, change of zone 18032 from R3 to R4 district on approximately 1.23 acres more or less, and from R4 to R3 residential district on approximately 0.13 acres more or less, generally located at North 102nd and O Street. Item 1.1B is special permit 18041 to allow for the development of 79 single-family attached lots with associated waivers on property generally located at North 102nd and O Streets. This will be final action on this item. And please note there were revisions to the staff report that were submitted this morning. Item 1.2 is change of zone 18033 to declare 1600 O Street a local historic landmark on property generally located at 1600 O Street. Item 1.3A is change of zone 18034 from AGR to R1 on property generally located at 3700 South 84th Street. And item 1.3B is special permit 872J to amend the Firethorn Community Unit Plan to redevelop a 10.16 acre lot into 9 single-family dwelling units on property generally located at 3700 South 84th Street. This is the final action on this item. And special permit number 18003A to amend the resolution for SP 18003 to include 19,000 square feet of commercial space on property generally located at 150 Southwest 14th Place. This is final action, and please note there were also revisions made to the staff report that were submitted to commissioners this morning. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these consent agenda items?
I don't see any.
Is there anybody here wishing to speak on any of these consent agenda items? If so, please stand and state that item. Okay, I see none.
Okay, I think we'll entertain a motion then.
So moved. To approve. Campbell.
Second. Finnegan.
Please call the roll.
Campbell?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
Yes.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
and Shear.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
I will now ask Amy to call any requests for deferral received prior to this meeting.
A request has been submitted on behalf of the applicant to place item 2.1, street and alley vacation 1800 on hold until further notice. Street and alley vacation 1800 to vacate P Street stub from the east right-of-way line of 70th Street to approximately 100 feet to the east, located adjacent to Lot 83, irregular tract, generally located at North 70th and P Streets. There's no recommendation on this item at this time.
So we'll entertain a motion for deferral.
Deferred, so moved. Washington?
Second, Edgerton.
Okay, call the roll.
Campbell,
Yes.
Edgerton,
Yes.
Finnegan,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
and Shear.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
Is there anyone here wishing to speak on this application today, the one we just deferred, instead of waiting? Okay. I think we will now proceed to public hearings. The staff will make a brief presentation, and the applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. If during your testimony you have copies of documents or materials you would like distributed to the Planning Commission members and/or included as part of the record, please provide a copy of that to Amy for distribution, and the staff will then be given an opportunity after that to respond to the testimony, and then the applicant shall have an opportunity for rebuttal. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The timer will go off after 4 minutes. Then you will have 1 minute to wrap up your testimony. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of the public hearing unless the Commission votes to defer action or continue the public hearing. Amy, please call the first public hearing item.
The first item is item 4.1, change of zone 05061C to amend the planned unit development, including the site plan and phasing, and to add excavating as a conditional use on property generally located at South First Street and West Denton Road. The staff recommendation is conditional approval. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on this application?
I see none. Desi?
Thank you, Commissioners. Desi Redmond, Planning Staff. This is a request to amend the site plan for Phase 2 on the Southwest Village PUD. That's where the horse track is proposed to be located, and also adding excavation as a permitted conditional use to the PUD. This original PUD was approved in 2006, and it was consistent with the comprehensive plan then, and as well as this amendment. And this amendment is also consistent with the overall spirit and intent of the existing PUD development plan. So to orient you to the site, West Denton Road kind of runs through the PUD property, and Highway 77 is here. Highway 77 and West Denton Road. The black boundary is the overall PUD boundary. The black and white boundary is what we're discussing today. That's the agricultural area. There's 3 total different areas. Up on the northern part is the B2, and there's a little piece of I3 here, and then the agricultural is to the south. So these areas generally follow the zoning regulations. There's specific deviations within the regulations, but those are spelled out in the development plan. This proposal amends Phase 2, which is the agricultural portion, which includes the horse track, and essentially, generally what they're doing is decreasing the size of the horse track with this proposal. The original proposal included a larger horse track, which would require them to realign South First Street, but because they're decreasing the size with this amendment, that will no longer be needed. They're also asking to add excavation as a permitted conditional use within the PUD, and essentially what that means is currently the applicant does not have all of the details to provide those conditions to us. And so they're saying at a later date, they'll provide all of those conditional terms to us, and that will be reviewed administratively. And so that use would be a conditional use within the PUD. With this application, they will also be required to vacate a portion of South First Street. That portion is where the Horseman Properties own property on both sides of South First Street, so only a portion of that South First Street and / Schmidt Court. There's also currently a driveway here that provides access to this property that's outside of the PUD. But it takes access through the PUD site, so they will be required to dedicate right-of-way or dedicate a public access easement with this amendment that will allow for future right-of-way to access that property. So those are kind of the general details. I'm happy to take any questions if you have some. Thank you.
Questions?
I want to talk about, I want to ask you a question about point 5 on the analysis about their delay in providing additional information. Is that a normal or common request to?
That I don't know if that happens a lot, but it's part of a PUD process where they can ask for, those sorts of deviations from like the typical standard zoning. So they're asking for that flexibility, which is part of a PUD.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Testimony from the applicant.
Good afternoon. Lynn Schuler, appearing for the Nebraska Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association. We are the owner of the property. Lynn is L-Y-N-N-E, Schuler, S-C-H-U-L-L-E-R, 7055 South First Street, Lincoln, 68512. This is actually a request to change the PUD to a more conservative model than the approach that you had already approved along with the City Council. What we have decided to do is, rather than spend the additional funds and effort to move First Street, which would have been required for a 1-mile oval, we are reducing the footprint of it to a 7/8 mile oval. We feel that it doesn't compromise the integrity of what we're trying to accomplish and does not impede the safety of the rider and the animals that are going to be racing on the surface. The turns are what make racing more or less dangerous for a horse. They have very long legs, and if you have to make a sharp turn, it puts stress on the animal. These are the same turns as Churchill Downs. So we are confident that this meets our requirements for safety and doesn't take away very much in terms of, we basically just shorten the oval instead of making the turns tighter. So we think it accomplishes everything we're trying to achieve. As far as the request to add excavation, when you have an oval like that, it's really problematic if you're going to be using the infield for a lot of other purposes because you don't want people to trample on your surface. It's kind of sensitive. So we had discussed excavating the middle of it. It's full of lean clay, which is needed for highway construction, that type of thing. And if we put a pond in the infield, that would also address flooding and drainage issues for the area. So we've thought that that would be a beneficial use not only for us, but for the surrounding area. So that's something that we are considering, and that's why we're asking that to be added as an option. Danae Kolkowski, our very knowledgeable attorney, and Nate Buss from Olson Associates is here to answer any technical or substantive questions because I am completely unqualified to answer those types of things. But if you have any questions about the general plan, I'm happy to answer those.
What was the size of the track at the old state fairgrounds?
5/8 of a mile.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So,
Okay.
yeah, we're increasing the size significantly. This will be the largest oval in the state of Nebraska. So we're pretty excited about that.
Thank you.
Assuming this moves forward, what's the timing?
We are looking at, Craig's in charge, July.
We're looking at a fall meeting.
Can you just come up to the microphone? Give your name and address and then speak.
Craig Wolf is the board member that's in charge of the project.
My name is Craig Wolf, Craig Wulf. I live here in Lancaster County, 1501 Longs Peak Circle. The goal for us right now is to have a fall meet where we get the track prepared and ready for horses to race on sometime either late August or early September. That's our goals at this time. We'll probably run a 3-day meet the first year and then try to expand on that in the future.
Racing in Lincoln has existed for literally 100 years. So we're trying to bring things back and make them even better than they were when we were running at Stateford Park.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Testimony in support? Is there any testimony in opposition? Do we have any questions for staff? Danae, do you want to say anything?
There were several conditions of approval listed in the staff report. We reviewed all of those with the client, and all of those conditions were acceptable. And we did have a few calls from some of the neighbors just asking, what's going on. And then when we explained we're really kind of just reducing the size of the track and it won't really be any additional impacts to them, they were fine for the ones that we talked to. So.
Okay,
Thank you.
Good luck.
I think we're ready for a motion then.
I would move approval of the change of zone 05061C.
Second, Core.
Discussion?
Great project. It was approved before. As she mentioned, just taking a bit more of a conservative tack, allowing them to not have to move the street. I think it's great that they're able to move forward, and happy to support it.
Yeah, I think this is a project that some members of our community have been waiting for a long time.
Right.
And, it'll be good to see this one go forward.
I agree. I think we're ready to vote.
Campbell,
Yes.
Edgerton,
Yes.
Finnegan,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
and Shear.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0. The next item on the agenda is text amendment 18016 to amend section 13048 of the Lancaster County zoning regulations relating to wind energy conversion system. The staff recommendation for this item is approval of the staff recommended alternative. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed?
I see none. Tom?
Tom Chaka, planning staff. This application is to amend section 13.048 of Lancaster County zoning related to commercial wind energy conversion systems brought by the applicant. I think the best thing, if it's okay with the commission, is just go through these point
Please.
by point. So the first section that's proposed to be amended is section D. The applicant is proposing to delete the shadow flicker modeling. This deletion is based on the assumption that in another section where they're requesting that turbines be set back 1 mile from property lines. And if the turbines were set back 1 mile from the property line, this requirement would not be needed. So that's why they're requesting that to be deleted in Part D. The next section they're requesting to be amended is Part F. Basically, the added language is just clarification that if a view corridor mapping, shed mapping was required, that it would be approved by the planning department. We don't think the wording is actually necessary. As being part of a special permit, it would be approved by or reviewed and approved by the planning department, but we don't object to the additional language for clarity. Part G, the applicant is proposing that turbines be set back 5,280 feet, 1 mile from a property line of non-participating lots. The current requirement is 2 times the turbine height to a property line or 3.5 times the turbine height to a dwelling, whichever is greater, and at a minimum 1,000 feet to a property line. The current setbacks and also noise levels gives protection to non-participating properties. The current setbacks were established in 2015 as part of an extensive public process and working with a group at that time. It's also important to remember not only does a turbine have to meet this setback regulation, but it also has to meet the noise level regulations. So even if it met this setback and it still didn't meet the noise regulation, the turbine would have to be set back further until it did meet that noise regulation. We feel that this change to Section G is contrary to the process, and that there already is a balance between protecting public's health while providing an option for commercial wind energy projects. So therefore, we recommended no changes to Part G. Part H, the applicant is requesting that this be deleted in its entirety. This was a requirement if you had a vacant lot and you were non-participating, that there would be a minimum of a 3-acre area. Yes, a 3-acre area that would not be affected by or would meet the requirements for noise and setbacks. Based on our recommendation of no changes to the noise or the setbacks, we recommend that Part H stay. Number 6, Part I deals with noise, and the applicant is requesting a change to the noise level where it's measured from. Currently, it's measured from a dwelling. The request is to have the noise measured from a property line. In reviewing 4 other counties adjacent, none of those counties measure from a property line. They're all from buildings and dwellings. This, as you recall, this section was just recently reviewed. Very long, extensive public hearing processes, went through both Planning Commission and County Board, and was adopted as it is today in the zoning regulations. So therefore, this change is not supported, and recommend that Section I stay as it is written today. Part J has to do with a pre-construction noise study. Some of this is just a little rewording and also adding approval at the end. Again, this is mainly for clarity, and we don't object to this request of Part J. Part K is requesting that each application include a pre-construction noise monitoring study to be reviewed and accepted by the health department. Currently, this is a may-be-conducted study. Planning and health feels that this is not necessary and could cause problems depending on where the turbines are located. If they're next to already a noisy area, it could make, actually, I think if Chris, if he could come up, maybe help me explain this part. I think it has to do with background noise and
Chris Schroeder with the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department. When you look at the existing code, the intent behind the pre-construction noise monitoring or measuring of sound is to allow higher noise limits. So if they go ahead and opt to do the pre-construction noise study, then that establishes background levels, and I think under the existing code, you can go, I think is it 3 to 5 decibels above that versus the 37 and 40 decibels.
okay, thanks. Part M is changing that a post-construction noise level measurement be at the discretion of the county board, and changing that to it shall be a requirement. Applicant is stating that this would be, this study would be required 1 year after completion of construction and then every 2 years thereafter. Planning don't object to the post-construction noise measurements. This would also help to ensure that the turbines do meet the noise levels described in the other section. The 2 years, don't think that's necessary and somewhat excessive. Property owners do still have the right to complain or file a complaint with the county board if they feel that noise levels are being excessive. And it also clarifies that any expense incurred would be paid by the special permit holder. There wasn't clear before who pays for what, so that's now spelled out. Part N, again, this clarifies who's responsible for paying if noise monitoring is required. We didn't have objection to that. There was a change recommended by health that the word parties be changed to parties is who would be doing the study, and instead of using the word parties would be changed to third-party professional acoustician or engineering firm specializing in noise measurements. So kind of clearly identify who that would be conducting the noise studies. Part O is something new. It's an added condition that agreements be provided to the planning department and be a public document subject to Nebraska Public Records Law. We feel these agreements are between private parties, and we do not require this of any other special permit in the zoning code, and don't feel that this is a needed addition. The applicant's letter talks about trespass zoning as being one of the reasons for these changes. I I contacted the American Planning Association, their legal department, and according to them, trespass zoning is not a legal term and is basically a term that is mainly just used by anti-wind turbine advocates. The county attorney's office also researched the term and did not find the term used in any case law or in any Nebraska state statute. Again, we're at the end of the staff report, there's a Exhibit B is a recommended alternative. That is what planning is recommending for approval.
Sorry.
Take any questions?
Questions?
Go ahead, Mona.
On Part M, you support the language asking for a post-construction assessment, but you reject the sort of the monitoring every 2 years. And I'm just curious, is that based on a technical specification, or is that based on, I mean, is there an understanding that the motors don't change over time, that once established, they never get louder?
I can answer it. Yeah, typically they don't change a lot in noise over time, but if there were like a gearbox failure or something like that, then that would obviously be perceived as louder. And that's when that, property owner could file a noise complaint, with the county board and to investigate that, perceived increase in noise.
So sort of the monitoring it will be by the surrounding adjacent landowners, and then so they'll have to complain if they feel it's too loud. And then how would the county, would they make the complaint to the county health department, or would they make it to the county commissioners? And,
They could do either.
okay, and then how would you determine that they had a valid claim and ask for monitoring?
Mm-hmm. And right now in the code, all those complaints go to the county board,
Okay.
and then they therefore decide on how to handle them, how to address them. They may decide to require noise, testing. And as we've talked in the past, just going out with a handheld noise meter determining compliance is not something that would be a good approach. I mean, it could be a longer test period. Noise levels change throughout the year, and I mean, it could be a fairly lengthy, noise testing to investigate a complaint. And that's why when that code was being developed, we felt it was, a good approach to have those complaints go to the county board and let them make that decision.
Okay.
I'm going to kind of piggyback off that a little bit. What if we have neighbors that just sort of continually complain because they didn't want the wind turbine in the first place? How is there a protection in there? I'm concerned that because the special permit holder is going to have to pay for the noise study, they're going to be continually to foot the bill for these noise studies. If we have one that said it was okay, I mean, are they going to require another one right away?
Again, that's why that is in the code right now, that those complaints do go to the county board, and they can see who is complaining and the nature of the complaints and decide on what they're going to do. They will have, assuming this gets passed requiring the post-construction, you'll have those numbers then that show compliance or non-compliance after the wind turbines are built. But like you said, if they start getting more complaints after that, then that's really up to their discretion on how do they handle those noise complaints.
Okay.
Maya?
Was there really any confusion about who pays for the noise study? As the language was written, I mean, I understand it clarifies, but was there a universe where somebody thought that the county or planning would pay for this?
Chris can piggyback on me here, but when we get noise complaints in the city or other places, I believe health and goes out and does investigate that. In the city, I know when you get complaints about lighting, building and safety goes out with a light meter and investigates it. So there could have been some assumption that health or somebody else was going out to check noise levels and at no cost. And since health has, said they don't really have the right equipment to monitor that, I think it probably is a good idea to spell out who's responsible for paying a third party to go out and measure these noise levels.
Do any other counties in Nebraska spell that out?
Not that I could find.
And what is standard practice industry-wide? Is it that the developer and operator pays for these post-construction studies, if they're mandatory or necessary?
I just looked at counties in Nebraska and, concentrated more with the adjacent counties. Gage County was the only one I found that even talked about a post-construction noise level, and they have it at the discretion of the county of whether or not they require that. Saline and Seward didn't have any requirement didn't even talk about it, so.
And then on that same note, is there any example of another special permit for an agricultural use where there is mandatory testing within a certain time period to check for compliance?
I don't know 100% for sure. I do know we have noise restrictions on racetracks, but I don't know if there's a condition in there that says it's got to be a study after a certain time after it's built or whatever. I think mainly it's on a complaint basis.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about Part D.
Part D.
And the original language, or the language that's currently in place. In particular, the last sentence where it talks about if the turbine violates the standard after the turbine is constructed, after the turbine is approved, then the turbine becomes a non-conforming use.
Mm-hmm.
What happens? I mean, it's determined to be a non-conforming use.
It can continue to go. Anytime you have a use in the city or county, wherever, and the rules change after the fact or something changes, and that use does not meet the current standards, it's considered non-conforming, but it can continue to remain.
Okay.
Is that a permanent grandfather? I mean, I'm going to think of it as a grandfather clause. Is that permanent, or will it come up for reassessment at some point, like I don't know, failure or discontinuation of use for a certain period of time?
In our zoning code today, if something is non-conforming or non-standard and it ceases to be used for 2 years, then it no longer can stay as non-conforming.
Okay.
So it would have to go away.
So in the pre-stage, and when it's still a proposed turbine, then that's when they provide the modeling data, and that data must be within the restrictions. The modeling data must be reflected in what the restrictions are. But then if the reality is that it isn't, the model perhaps was wrong, but it was more, there was more shadow flicker than expected, it still can go on, but it's a non-conforming use. That's the way that works.
Well, right, I mean, this section, you know, that last sentence is in there because if the turbine goes up and it's a vacant property and the turbine is erected, then somebody comes in and builds a house and it doesn't meet the shadow flicker, it's saying, you know, you're not required
That's
to tear the
helpful.
turbine down, it's just a non-conforming status.
Okay, that's helpful. I hadn't thought about it being an unoccupied.
Right.
land.
This specific sentence is really just if someone's moving in to it, so the turbine's already there, the turbine was built properly, but then someone comes in and decides to, you know, build a house, regardless, right next to the wind turbine. It's essentially not necessarily their fault, but the wind turbine is now a non-conforming use, but when it was originally built, it did meet everything. It's
Thank you.
essentially people that come to the problem.
That's the clarity I needed. Thank you.
Any other questions? Dick?
In section J, where the professional pre-construction noise study, why did you put it at a mile away when the requirements for the turbine to hit the noise level is less than that?
That was put in during the original in 2015. I wasn't part of that, so.
They seem inconsistent with each other.
I can speak to that. So when we asked for the modeling from Epsilon Associates, and we talked about, so given the existing noise limits for non-participating properties, so we're talking the 37 and 40,
Right.
what that modeling showed was that, you know, the dwellings needed to be a minimum of 1 mile away. Well, we wanted to make sure that, well, what if you had a dwelling that was 1.2 miles away? We wanted to make sure that it was clear that they needed to model all the dwellings to ensure compliance with those noise standards.
Okay.
And that's why we said at least 1 mile.
Got it. Okay.
Anything else? I have a question. I want to go back to Part G. Seems to be a little foundational paragraph here. And I don't have a question as much as just want to have both of you or whoever wants to do this go back through and contrast the reason for distance setback, and then versus that contrasted with the noise setback, because through all of these processes over the last, 3-4 years, my understanding is that the annoyance is the noise. So what we've been talking about, Dick just mentioned this, the distance to alleviate the noise annoyance is what we're really concerned about. The distance setback that's in here is related, what I've always understood to be a danger from a turbine from collapsing or something like that.
That's correct.
But it doesn't have anything to do with the noise annoyance. The noise annoyance distance is
determined by the noise limits.
determined by its noise annoyance. That 1,000 feet or 5 or a mile doesn't have any impact on the noise annoyance requirement for us to be
Right.
able to be below that decibel level, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is there any other things that we need to clarify to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of what that's all about?
Again,
I don't want to assume anything.
These were, determined 3 years ago after a very long, I wasn't part of that, but my understanding is, these were hashed out after a long process of working with a lot of different individuals. And so these setbacks were probably determined for safety and maybe for giving them, a distance that everybody thought was, satisfactory to be far enough away from a dwelling. I don't know if there could be a situation where a turbine could meet the noise level and be less than what these setbacks are.
Right.
So-
Maybe in the future,
so it's
for example.
both.
Well, if the turbines get quieter.
Yeah, exactly.
So this
Yeah.
gives another level of security, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Okay, I'm understanding it the right way then. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I'm sure there'll be more later. So we'll have testimony from the applicant now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, Mark Hunziker. I'm appearing on behalf of the Prairie Wind Watchers. I just want to make one brief comment about your process here. We just had a half-hour presentation by the staff about our application. We're now going to get 5 minutes to make a presentation about our own application and try to explain it to you in 5 minutes. It's just not a fair system. If you're going to have these staff presentations, then at least give us equal time or do something to alleviate that problem.
We'll consider that.
So
get started.
As to the text amendment,
You can always ask for more time when you come up.
Sorry?
We always ask if you want more time when you come up.
Last time I was given extra time was quite a while ago, but I'll save that. The application addresses concerns that we raised when we were last here about noise levels for participating properties, magnifying other deficiencies in the zoning resolution. The issues such as setbacks and how they're measured, requirements of a noise study as part of the application, post-construction noise monitoring and enforcement were all largely ignored in 2015 when those amendments were adopted. These issues need to be addressed now. They need to be addressed before a developer files an application and claims that he's relied upon your existing regulations, as was actually done in Antelope County, Nebraska, where we had another one similar to this. Our amendments address clarifying and providing some certainty to the provisions of this ordinance and the protection of non-participating property. We spent a little bit of time on this mile separation issue. Without going back over that entire discussion, I think it's important to remember that every time the health department or the developer has come up here, they've said to you that we can't meet these standards within a mile. We think that a mile is a much more certain standard for measurement and enforcement purposes than the sound levels. To establish a violation of the sound level at a point a mile away from a wind turbine requires an expensive, time-consuming study and may end up ambiguous. But if you have a setback of a mile from that turbine, you can measure that and you can get a measurement down to about 1/10 of a foot with a $300 or $400 survey equipment. And it doesn't take very long, and it's simple. And it gives you some certainty that there is at least that mile separation to protect that non-conforming property owner. And more importantly, these separations need to be measured from the property line of the non-participating property. Non-participating property in Lancaster County, even if it's zoned agricultural, has other uses to which it can be put rather than just row crops or grassland. It needs to have the ability to use that property for residential uses, for churches, cemeteries, group homes, domestic shelters, daycare facilities, and the like, all of which would have the same kind of impact from noise as any existing house. If you say to a person who owns a parcel of land that you have the ability to do these things and the right to do these things under the existing zoning ordinance, and then say to the person across the road, you can do something that will effectively prohibit that person from actually using their property for those purposes, then you're essentially taking those rights from that non-participating property owner and handing them to the developer. We have no other uses in the entire county where measurements are taken other than to the applicant's property line. We're giving up the road rights of way with this one, but usually all of the setbacks are measured from the applicant's property line. All of the setback has to be absorbed on the property of the developer in every other case. Now, why you would establish a use which then effectively says, well, we know that there are health impacts that affect people outside the boundary of this property, so we're just going to say, well, as long as there isn't a house there today, you can go ahead and have the impact that will prohibit that property owner from actually using their property for a house or a daycare center or a church or any of those other uses that are available to them without any compensation whatsoever. And you can call that trespass zoning or you can call it a pumpkin, I don't care. Whether it's a legally defined term is irrelevant. You know, everybody in this room knows what a slip-in apartment is, right? That's not a legal term. That's not a planning term. It's an epithet that was designed or come up with by people who hated those things. And that's what this is. It's just a shorthand term for referring to the taking of property rights that are not part of the participating project. There are other things that we may or may not have time to get to here that have to do with the noise modeling being part of the application, which was a complete oversight in the first draft of this ordinance. The pre-construction noise monitoring, in my opinion, it's worthwhile simply to establish a baseline from which to measure whether or not the sound created by the project is over and above the limits established by this ordinance. Post-construction noise measurements need to be required. They shouldn't be discretionary ever. And apparently the staff is agreeing that we ought to have a required noise measurement after construction. The county board can require these things at the developer's expense under the amendments that we have here. Again, previously, all there was an opportunity to complain and convince the county board to order some testing, and no language that supported the county board saying, and oh, by the way, developer, you have to pay for it. And certainly no hope, in my opinion, that there would be any money laying around in the health department budget to go pay for a $50,000 noise study. So I guess I'm out of time, but I would...
If you want more time, you take more time.
Okay, I'll just take another minute then. With respect to the contract provision about making those things public, I understand that there's a reluctance to do that, but here's an alternative for you. Adopt a recommendation to the county board that says it shall be against the public policy of Lancaster County for contracts between participating landowners and wind energy conversion system developers to prohibit or penalize participating owners complaining about noise levels or other operational aspects of the development or disclosure of other terms of the agreement. Such provisions shall be void, but shall not affect enforceability of other terms. At least then, you may have some assurance that there are not people who are being prohibited from complaining and skewing the results of surveys saying that they're really not annoyed because they're being paid. And it may not be just because they're being paid, it may be because they're prohibited from saying they're annoyed. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Questions?
So is that the intent with regard to the proposed Part O, was really to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, we've been saying that from the very beginning, that it's not, you know, the reported annoyance levels by people who are being paid to to endure the annoyance is one thing. It's quite another if they're not only being paid but are subject to some sort of penalty or possibly losing their paycheck if they actually do complain.
What would be your definition of penalize?
Any sort of monetary penalty, any sort of reduction in the annual compensation under the agreement, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Thanks.
Thank you.
Do we have testimony in support of the application?
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Post. I'm an attorney with Baylor Evans Law Firm. I am here on behalf of the group, the Prairie Wind Watchers. And today's text amendment, it achieves a lot. There is a lot in it. But what I want to talk about is a topic that has been touched upon by all the previous testifiers, is trespass zoning. My goal is to try and clarify that a little bit. It is not a legal term. It doesn't have a clear definition, but it is a term that describes that phenomenon where you have a non-participating property owner's property that's experiencing noise at a level authorized only for participating property owners. So to step back, where trespass zoning occurs under Lancaster County zoning ordinances is where noise levels are measured from the outside of an existing dwelling unit instead of at the property line. That means that because noise levels are measured from somewhere within the property, there is this zone, which I'm going to call a trespass zone. That's not a legal term, but we'll call it a trespass zone right now, which is the area from outside of that dwelling to the property line on a non-participating property owner's property that's experiencing noise above that 37 or 40 decibel level. So therefore, you have this zone on the non-participating property owner's property where if they were to build a home in that area or one of the other allowed uses that was mentioned, a group home, a daycare, it's going to be experiencing noise at that heightened level that has been shown to have potential for negative health impacts on non-participating owners. So we've walked through this idea, but the best way I think to demonstrate it is with pictures of it. So what I have right here, I think there's a button for Zoom. There we go. What I have right here is an example of a hypothetical example of where a wind turbine would be. You can see this, I promise I've got a zoomed in picture. You can see this tiny square in the middle where we've cited our hypothetical wind turbine. And this radius is 1 mile. So that's the distance that has been stated would be the minimum distance from the turbine to meet those non-participating noise levels. This hypothetical wind turbine is also at least 1,000 feet from any setback property line. Here's slightly zoomed in, and I want to acknowledge as we go forward that these properties that we're showing here as completely covered by this noise zone would have to be participating properties. We're not disputing that. But what I want to do is I want to focus our attention on this property on the east side of the circle. So if we look at this property, you can see that almost the entire property is within that noise zone. That zone where this wouldn't have to be a participating property, but this much of the property, hypothetically, would experience noise at that 50 decibel level, or at least above the 37 to 40 decibel level for non-participating owners. And yes, there is the requirement that limits the trespass zone that it can only cover, or that 3 acres cannot be affected by it. But if you look, we've got some corners right here that aren't covered by that zone. Those corners would be enough that this property would not have to be a participating property. Another example, if we move to the northern side of that, of our circle shown, would be here. We've got these 2 properties, and you can see that maybe only a little less than half of these properties would be in that trespass zone. But what you'll also notice is that the entire part of the property that has frontage on a road would be within that trespass zone. That means that if this hypothetical non-participating landowner wants to build a house or a daycare or a group home on their property, they would have to locate it back here so it wouldn't be subject to those adverse health consequences. And that means that if this person wants to build a house on their property, they'd have to build a road from, I think this is West Pella Road, across their property to get all the way up to that area, so that their house wouldn't be, their home wouldn't be subject to those noise levels for participating property owners. And finally, those are some extreme, well, those are extreme examples, but very likely examples of how this could affect property owners. Here's just another example, another one where we have a parcel of property that could be almost entirely covered by that noise zone. The property owner could be a non-participating property owner, and now they have only that tiny portion of their property that would be at noise levels to meet the requirements for non-participating property owners. Hypothetically, they might be able to build a house on that corner of property so that their house would not subject them to adverse health consequences, but they're very limited where they can actually enjoy their property without risking their health. So this issue of trespass zoning is one that disappears when we start to measure noise levels from the property line as opposed to from somewhere within the property. That's why that is proposed as a part of this text amendment, and that is a part that will have a significant impact on Lancaster County property owners and their health and their ability to utilize their property. That's why we would ask that this amendment be adopted. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions?
I have a question. Would you put the last visual back?
This one?
Yes, please. So would you point specifically to the property you were discussing? Because
I'm sorry, this one right here.
So you're saying that even though they're within the blue diameter of participating noise, so this could be 50 dBA, they would be considered non-participating? How would that happen?
Because noise is measured from outside the outside wall of a dwelling unit.
Tell me where the dwelling is.
On this property, there is no dwelling.
Okay.
And the savings clause within the current zoning code says that your whole piece of property can't be affected. You have to have at least 3 acres that aren't affected by that noise if you're a non-participating owner. This corner is just over 3 acres. So that's where almost a huge amount of this property would be affected and have that noise requirement, or would have noise at the level above that for non-participating property owners, but they could still be non-participating because they've got that 3 acre corner.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thanks. Testimony in support.
My name's Larry Alder. I live in Cortland, Nebraska. I'm going to say kind of what Ann said, but I'm going to put it in a little different way. I made this. Can we see this? Does it show up? Do I have to push a button or what?
There we go.
Okay. This is going to put this, today I'm going to try to put this in perspective for people that live in town. Okay? You buy your lot. You build your house on it. You spend your life paying for your house. All right? Your neighbor across the way, he builds. And what he builds is an eyesore to you. It's ugly. You get annoyed just looking at it. And on top of that, he plays his stereo. And he plays it loud at odd hours, day and the night. But, okay, and when you're here in your house, you can hear the thump, thump, thump of the bass. And when the wind's in the wrong direction, you can hear the noise. But when you stand out here by your house, it's within the sound limits of your town. okay? Now, you walk out here to this back of your property where you build a playground for your kids, put this pool, an outdoor barbecue grill. And as you walk out there, it gets louder and louder and louder. When you get out here, you're annoyed. You're highly annoyed. But when you're back here, it's within the sound limits. And when you're inside, where's where you spend most of your time. At least that's the answer I got from the planning department and the health department. That is the reasoning that is measured from the exterior wall of your house. Okay, now, let's look, like this Ann said, let's look at this in acreage. This is an acreage rather, and this is the setback. This is the setback from the wind turbine. This is a wind turbine. Okay? Now, you can see here, he has less than 3 acres in the setback. This guy here has even less. He doesn't have a house there. The way this setback, this can affect any parcel, just like Ann said, any size of parcel. When you can leave it just to the corner of the 3 acres in there, it could affect any parcel. If we don't keep it from the property line, the decibel levels can actually be higher than what is allowed to the participating people because of the setback. We need to keep our setbacks from the property line in order to protect us this way. Yes, he said once again, in letter H, section H, in the code, it says they have to leave 3 acres. Okay, very well. Well, that's like what I'm trying to say there. Like I said, if we need to keep this amendment because of the fact we won't run into this trouble of this setbacks with the 3 acres or less out of the property zone, out of the noise zone. I guess that's what I got to say. We need to approve this amendment so we don't have these problems in the future. Set the setbacks from the property lines.
Thanks. Questions?
Questions?
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Yvonne Mahakapool, 2331 West Ash Road, Cortland, Nebraska. Our 100-year-old home is located in this proposed wind farm. This is the last place I really want to be today. We are not here to prolong the process, but to protect our health and property rights. We are seeking for a 1-mile setback from our property lines. I've provided a map of Lancaster County. The yellow circles represent the 3-mile buffer zone around Lincoln. All the green circles are a 1-mile buffer zone around small towns. No industrial wind turbines can be built into these circled areas. All residents of these towns are protected from wind turbines. Their health and property rights are protected. What about those of us living outside of these areas? And where's our protection? Text Amendment 18016 will give those of us who do not want to risk our health and property rights the same protection as those living in Lincoln and the surrounding small towns. Don't we deserve the same protection as they do? Twice noise limits have been increased to accommodate big wind, back in 2015 and again in 2018. Neither time have we asked for those changes, but big wind and big money have. Our amendment is not unreasonable. Since the adoption of the 50 dBAs for participating residents, this amendment is necessary for everyone's health and maintaining our property rights. We all agree with renewable energy. There is new technology being developed all the time. Solar and geothermal are already used in LPS and state capital, keeping our local savings and not going into a grid, just going anywhere. Wind energy can find a place, but not within 1 mile of anybody's property. If one turbine cannot be built as a result of a mile setback from a property line, it is just too much proof that this is not a proper place for industrial wind complexes. It is just a densely populated area. All residents of Lancaster County and the scenic landscapes of Nebraska deserve a mile setback, if not more. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Questions? Thank you. in support of the amendment, or of the application, sorry?
My name is Curtis Schwaniger. I live at 3750 West Hallam Road, Hallam, Nebraska. A number of weeks ago, I received a call on my answering machine, and the caller said he was a representative of Nextera. He wanted to inform me that Nextera had purchased the Volkswind company, but Nextera was not going to put a wind farm up because there was not enough wind. He said Nextera was looking for land to put a solar farm on the land, and offered me $200 an acre. The next week, a man came to my house and said he was a representative of Nextera, and he gave me his Nextera card. He told me the same thing that the first Nextera man told me, but offered me $400 an acre. I told him about the message on my answering machine, and I played it for him. He didn't know what to think about it and said he would have to check on it and he would get back to me. He never got back to me. The next week, I heard that Nextera had talked to both Lancaster and Gage counties about putting up a wind farm. Nextera will probably say that these men were not representing them, but if I had signed, Nextera would have to sign a contract, and they would have control of my land to do what they wanted to do with it. This is deception. I think Nextera, by their actions, cannot be trusted to do what they say, but are very deceptive in what they say. I think the county needs to lay down strict rules before any permits are given. I think the county needs to stand up to what I call bullies from another state who come in here and try to tell the county how to run the county. Prairie Wind Watchers have over 352 contacts that oppose a wind farm, and the number is growing. I hear that Nextera has 84 people signed up for the wind farms. That's a ratio of 5 to 1. I think the majority should have the say, not Nextera, in how the county is run, especially since it is a proven fact that wind towers cause health problems. The mile setback from the property line is a good standard to keep wind towers from coming into highly populated areas, such as southern Lancaster County and northern Gage County. It will also keep the county from being polluted with towers that medevac helicopters would have to dodge to maybe save a life. I don't think we can allow self-serving wind developers to come into the county whose object is to make an approximate $50 million profit in tax incentives, your taxes and my taxes, and cause a split in the county. Wind towers, if we need to have them, need to be put out in the open areas where their health hazards and other issues can be dealt with and not make life miserable for so many people. Thank you.
Thanks. Questions? Thank you.
Joetta Schwaninger, 3750 West Hallam Road, Hallam, Nebraska. I support Prairie Wind Watchers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. In November and December, the Health Department talked to the Lincoln-Lancaster County Planning Commission and county commissioners about certain studies. Also, the Health Department mentioned that their studies were peer-reviewed, implying that the only information worth considering is that which is peer-reviewed. Tough questions should have been asked. How old was the information? Are there more current studies? If so, what do they say? Were children included in their studies? Were independent companies contracted to do the studies? Were medical personnel and professional audiologists involved in the studies? Were the studies by mail-in ballots, personal visits, or simply men behind desks tallying call-in complaints? Regarding peer reviewing, how many reviews were there? Was there only one? Was the review negative or positive? How many reviews does one need to be convinced of something? Noise annoyance is a minor factor. Major health issues are the real problem. We're talking about infrasound and low-frequency sound messing with people's brains and internal organs. We are here today to talk about proper setbacks of industrial wind turbines for the health and safety of citizens of Lancaster County. The following is from a letter to the author of the book, Paradise Destroyed. I was and still am on Holt County's Zoning and Planning Board. On the week of the vote on this wind farm, we received a binder providing info on the project. I, along with all of the board members, did not do our research. This info is a one-way road for the wind projects. That night, I asked specific questions regarding location of towers and noise issues. The answers I received were all lies. At the time, I believed the representative. When the vote came, my gut said to vote no, and I did not. This is a regret I will have to live with forever. The commissioners were looking at all the money for the county. Not so. We were told the towers would not be closer than 4 to 5 miles. They are 1 3/8 miles from our home. They also said we would not hear them. We do, when we are on the backside or on the downwind direction. The sound is disturbing to our peaceful place, and I would interject here. It's the health issues we're talking about, not just aggravation. Everybody needs to, more part of his letter. Everybody needs to research other areas that have had wind towers in place for a while, and the picture becomes very clear. They do not work, and the damages caused to health, safety, and welfare outweigh any benefits. I am an adjuster for Farm Bureau and will be traveling next week. If you or anyone else would like to come to our place and witness this ridiculous project, just let us know. You are more than welcome. That's from Keith May, March 2017, pretty current, Holt County, Nebraska. This county needs an amendment of at least a mile setback of industrial wind turbines for non-participants from property line to be considered. That is a compromise, but necessary for the protection of the citizens of Lancaster County.
Questions? Okay.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Mike Woodward, 2750 Southwest 14th Road, Cortland, Nebraska. I'm here to talk to you about the noise standards, and I'll put this on here quick. Can you see that? Or does that work?
It just takes a minute.
Is that okay? What I want to do is talk about the noise standards here. I'm in support of the mile, because part of my concerns I have is the manipulation of noise testing. I've looked at research. I'm going to give you guys some research before I leave of noise testing, where a good example, the 2015 Canadian study, one thing that wasn't discussed on that was the noise testing on that was only done between the months of June and October. Nothing was ever said about that. In the months of June and October up there are probably the least wind. So I mean, there's manipulation on the research that has been presented, and with noise standards and with dealing with noise, there's many factors that can go into it, whether it be landscape. You know, a lot of comparisons that we had on the noise studies. Previous text amendment was out of Canada, Prince Edward Island, Ontario, Canada. What do they have in comparison to Lancaster County, Nebraska? They have trees, sound absorbing, landscape. You know, down here in Lancaster County, we hardly have any trees. That noise is going to carry versus being absorbed with objects. So the other concern I have with not with the noise standards versus the mile setback is, say they place a wind turbine and you have a neighbor that doesn't, that complains about the noise, okay? With mechanical equipment, you can manipulate that. What's to say when they go to test that wind turbine, they turn those blades and slow it down. I mean, that's pretty easy to manipulate that sound. Once that test is done, they can spin it right back up and twitch those blades and back to the same noise again. So how are we going to control that? You know, I work in the occupational health and safety world, and I've been involved with noise testing, and you can manipulate, the only way you can really, you can manipulate it by mechanical speed, equipment speed. There is engineering on equipment that maybe make it quieter, but the only real control of noise is distance, or something object absorbent, which would probably be a non-participant's house. So that's why I suggest, I have concerns, you know, with the way this testing is going to be conducted. Will it be conducted in the summer months? You know, if somebody complains, is it going to be conducted in the summer months? Is it going to be conducted in the winter months when the wind is blowing? You know, there's factors, variables there. You know, with the mile setback, this is going to be about the only guarantee us as property owners is going to have. You know, mile setback, what it's going to do is it's going to eliminate the need for testing. It's going to be cheaper for the county, the wind company. You know, it's going to eliminate the ice throw and the shadow flicker hazards. It's going to be it's going to be the only consistent guarantee on noise for us as non-participants or community members around here. You know, the noise standards that the health department has created and the modeling project that Nextera had presented to the supports a mile setback, at least, you know, if you look at those standards. So like I said, what I suggest and what I ask you is to make an informed decision based on the mile setbacks. It's going to eliminate a lot of this quibbling around about noise, you know, presentation of half information from what I've seen sitting in these these meetings. So that's where I'm at. Like I said, I request you guys approve the mile setback for the benefit of the community. So,
questions? Thanks.
Thank you. Do you guys keep that, or you want that? Or?
Testimony in support.
All right, my name is Judy Doherty, and I live at P.O. Box 193, Hallam, Nebraska. I live on 3 acres smack dab right in the middle of the Blue Prairie Wind Project. The problem we had with the last wind developer and now with the current one, Nextera, is that they lie and only speak partial truths as necessary to meet their needs. I heard over and over again, as you did from David Kuhn, the project manager, for this project with Nextera, that they always go with the turbine manufacturer's recommended setbacks. He said that Nextera is planning on using GE turbines in this project and that their recommended setback is 1.1 the turbine height. I'm sorry, I'm really tired of hearing that. What they purposely don't tell you folks is that is for a fall zone only, if the turbine collapses. They are trying to imply that a 1.1 turbine height encompasses everything, and it most certainly does not. What they refuse to disclose is the manufacturer's safety setbacks for ice throw, blade throw, fire zone, and employee hard hat zones, which I can assure you is much further than a 1.1 turbine height. We asked Volkswagen when they were here for a year and a half to produce a safety manual for the turbines they were going to use. It was promised many times, but never produced. Down Nextera is doing the same song and dance. I ask all of you, has any one of you seen a safety manual for a 500-foot GE turbine? That would make this whole process so much easier. You go by the written documentation from the turbine manufacturer itself. But I can tell you, you will never see that safety manual produced. The reason is because what it recommends for setbacks are not in alignment with what NextEra wants them to be. All of the U.S. manufacturers of wind turbines have been heavily pressured for years to not make this information public. If they make their safety manuals public, then the wind developers won't buy their turbines. This is a documented fact. Many of us have repeatedly tried to get the safety manuals from GE ourselves, and they never respond to us. Philip Clement from NextEra spoke to the board members last month and stated that NextEra was the world's most ethical company. I'm here to tell you they are far from ethical. Mr. Clement testified under oath that it was NextEra's policy to never place a turbine any closer than 1,600 feet from a home. I presented to you an article from just 6 months ago that proves he lied. Kim Tyndall of Osborne, Missouri says that she has 30 turbines within 5 miles of her home, with the closest one being 1,400 feet. She says she has documented items in her home shaking off shells from the turbines. We also heard from 2 other gentlemen that day that came up from Missouri to testify. We heard from a Mr. Johnny Walker, who testified that NextEra placed one wind turbine 600 yards from the south of his home and one 700 yards to the north, and that trying to live on his property now is living hell. The other gentleman was Adam Ombaugh, who testified NextEra placed a wind turbine 1 mile from his home, and he has complained of the noise to NextEra, and they do nothing about it. He also reported his neighbor has a wind turbine 1,600 feet from her home, and NextEra has recorded the noise level at her home at 92 decibels and has done nothing about it. He says the biggest issue is that there's no noise police. So us homeowners who have homes in the project area have bound together and hired a lawyer to try to get some clarifications in your zoning to help protect us from dishonest companies like NextEra. Right now, our area can be classified as an existing agricultural and rural residential area. A large-scale turbine project will change that character of the area to what would be called an industrial overlay. The project footprint encompasses thousands of acres. There are many studies that show residential uses will experience impaired aesthetic appeal, impaired quiet use and enjoyment, and marketability and value of their homes. And that impact extends at a minimum to 1 mile up to 3 miles from a wind turbine from a home. We don't like what we've already heard from NextEra. We don't like what we have heard from others who have already dealt with NextEra. We deserve to be safe on our own properties and to not have them impacted in a negative way. We have the right to demand of you to ensure us of that. This is why we are here today. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. Testimony in support, yes, support.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Newman. My address is 1500 Pella Road, Martell, and I live just 2 miles north of the Hallam Road. I just want to say I think we've heard some really good testimony this afternoon, and I appreciate the time and the effort that you are taking to consider this issue. We heard earlier that non-participants are well protected with the current regulations, and I propose that that is not true. I don't feel that non-participants are well protected. I agree that it's much easier to measure distance than to measure noise, and that's why I agree with this proposal of 1 mile setback. It's a lot easier standard to measure and to regulate. The property line for the noise and the distance protects future use of the property. Measurement from the dwelling highly limits that use. We've been told many times, as was mentioned before, that modeling shows at least a 1 mile setback. And all we're asking is that we have that in writing so that would be our standard. Personal testimony says that noise under a mile and often noise well over a mile is a problem. And I would beg to differ with the assessment that noise annoyance, and especially infrasound, is not more of a problem if it's closer. Common sense just says it would be more of a problem. I think a lot of the safety issues to do with wind turbines have not been studied long enough to draw a conclusion that they're perfectly safe. And I think this issue still comes down to putting a large intrusive industry in an agricultural community. And no matter what you may have heard or what we are told, this is not an agricultural project. This is absolutely an industrial project. We've heard many times about the big financial gain for participants. And I don't know if anybody else has done their math, but when you consider the amount that NextEra has said they will give to participants, and then divide that by the number of participants they're expecting, you have a very, very small amount of reimbursement for participants. Certainly not enough to save anybody's family farm, and not even enough to really make a difference. Like we were told that it's like having a second job. Well, maybe a few hours a week if you call that a second job, but it's certainly not a substantial reimbursement financially. I just ask that you would consider this amendment and the ramifications that this brings to the non-participants, because we've been told that their regulations are not going to change anything for us, and it absolutely will change a lot of things for those of us who are not participating. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. Testimony and support.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Dabbs, 26240 Southwest 86th Street, Hallam, Nebraska. I'm here speaking in support of the amendment. I believe that the 1 mile setback in writing, Charlotte said it best, you can measure distance a lot better than you can measure noise. And the measurement from the property line would be best for us to protect me and my property. The last text amendment that raised the decibel limit to 50 for participating landowners, my board commissioner, Deb Shore, voted no. She was the only one that voted no. And she voted no primarily because of the population density in Lancaster County. She said the second largest county in the state is not a place for these wind turbines. Thanks.
Questions? Thank you. Testimony and support. Are we finished with support? Okay, let's go to testimony in opposition.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. David Levy, Baird Home Law Firm, 1700 Farnham Street, on behalf of NextEra Energy Resources and Blue Prairie Wind. With all respect, I also have a complaint about the process here today. 3 weeks and 1 day ago, we were here before the county board on the same issue fundamentally that is before you today, which is setbacks for non-participating property owners. You heard a lot of the same testimony. You saw some very similar maps, or the county board did at that time. This body did about 3 weeks before that. Those decisions were made. Here we are revisiting that same issue within weeks of those decisions being made. It's the classic second bite at the apple. That said, NextEra took this application very seriously and took it in good faith. And instead of just saying, darn it, we just went through this, we're not going through this again, we're opposed, we went through it line by line by line. And we found things in there where we said, this is fine. It's very reasonable to have post-construction noise monitoring a year out. Pre-construction noise modeling, things like that, totally fine. So while I am testifying in opposition absolutely to the application as filed, I will also tell you that NextEra supports the staff's recommendation of sending, I believe it's 4 of the proposed amendments with some modifications forward. That said, I also want to focus primarily on this idea again of trespass zoning. One of the failings in the testimony and some of the lack of clarity in the testimony that you heard from the proponents of a 1 mile setback, it's a 1 mile setback from a property line, right? What you heard before is what the noise modeling shows is that a non-participating property owner who didn't have their noise levels changed at all by the text amendment that you heard about 6 weeks ago has a noise limit of 37 decibels at night. That's approximately 1 mile plus or minus to a dwelling. Now what they're talking about is 1 mile to a property line. It's not as simple as saying, let's not bother with that noise measuring stuff and just call it a mile. It's a property line versus a dwelling unit. The dwelling unit is where all of the peer-reviewed health studies, academic health studies, show that the annoyance happens, that the potential health impact from the annoyance happens. Again, there's no evidence of direct health impacts. It's the annoyance that results in that. That's when people are sleeping, that's where they live, that's where they spend the majority of their time. Let's also remember, please, that this is an agricultural zoning district. One of the examples you saw talked about a lot in town with somebody right over the backyard fence. This is not that kind of an area, typically. Some of the maps you saw that were described by the person showing them to you as extreme examples, assume the circle, as I understood it, was the 50 decibel circle for a participating landowner. Noise doesn't drop off on a cliff. Right outside of that 50 decibel line is a 49 decibel line and a 48 decibel line and a 47 decibel line. So while part of that non-participating property was outside of that 50 decibel circle, that property probably is going to have no impact from a wind turbine or very little impact from a wind turbine because that entire non-participating property would be subject probably to a noise level of at least 37 decibels. So that example it's a false dichotomy. It suggests that the noise, if you have 50 on part of your property and you're a non-participant, you're still subject to noise right across that line. You have that protection of that 37 decibel, that much lower limit. That the rule of thumb distance between 50 decibels and 37 decibels is probably a quarter of a mile to a mile. So 50 decibels, quarter mile, a couple thousand feet. 37 decibels, as the model showed, approximately. It all varies on circumstances. The modeling is very conservative. As I told you that night, the modeling assumes the wind comes from every direction at the same time, for example, of how conservative it is. There's a long distance from 50 down to 37. So those maps really don't paint an accurate picture of those non-participating properties and 50 decibels, if I understood them correctly. Mr. Chairman, you asked about the reasoning for the setbacks, for the physical distance setback and the noise setback, and I think that was answered very well. I won't belabor it, but it's a really important point. We're now mixing those things up, and we're ignoring the reason that you have zoning regulations. When I was here before, I talked about the balance between protecting private property rights and protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. That proposal of a mile setback to a property line is arbitrary and really doesn't even attempt to reflect that balance. It sounds like I'm out of time, so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Representatives of NextEra are here as well.
Questions? Maya?
Are post-construction mandatory post-construction noise studies industry standard?
I don't know that I would say they're industry standard, but I am familiar. In my experience, other counties do require them, and typically they do require them once, typically about a year after construction. And that's a good thing, I think, because it kind of sets a baseline, right? The project is built, and now we have the actual project out there that we can go and measure, and it's a report. It's provided to the county, and everybody knows what the situation is. Continuing to do it after that and after that really is just an expense and a burden, because the turbines, other than if there's a failure and a significant change that somebody's going to notice, and frankly, they shouldn't have to wait another 2 years to get resolved. They'll complain about it, but otherwise there's really no reason to keep doing it. But a one-time post-construction noise monitoring requirement within that year is in my experience, not uncommon, and NextEra has no objection to that.
Do you know if any other counties in Nebraska require a post-construction?
I know Webster County does. NextEra built a project there a couple of years ago and then did that post-construction study and provided that to the county and also to landowners in the area who asked for it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Testimony in opposition.
Hello, my name is David Kuhn with NextEra Energy. We own the Blue Prairie Wind Project, which is currently proposed in southern Lancaster, northern Gage counties. I'm technically standing up in opposition of the proposed amendment as it's written, although as you just heard, we are supporting the staff's recommendation. I do want to, I'm not going to repeat any of the points that were made, and really I'll use the bulk of my time just to take your questions. However, there were some comments made today about NextEra that I want to respond to. First and foremost, there was a comment about the GE recommended setbacks, and I've just emailed Steve Hendrickson that those recommended setbacks. So you'll see that for public disclosure, where it shows 1.1 times tip height for blade failure, turbine collapse, ice throw, and other safety considerations. But you'll be able to see that and disclose it publicly, at your leisure. The second thing was you're hearing some comments about our core values and our trustworthiness, and I'm sorry that this is a bit of a distraction from what we're considering today. I would highly recommend that you go back and look through the public comments of what was submitted from our previous text amendment from Missouri. This group, Prairie Wind Watchers, brought some folks to testify, talk about how NextEra is, troublesome and so forth. And it turns out that the presiding commissioner from the county where we were doing business in Missouri saw that broadcasted on the TV and wrote a comment that really defended our values and so forth. And that's also publicly available. So I would encourage everybody to go read his comments as far as how we do business in other counties. But that's really, I don't think that there's anything else that I need to say as far as this text amendment. David Levy did a good job of walking you through. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Questions? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is David Schwaniger. I live at 28500 Southwest 14th Street, Martell. My address is Martell, but I live 2 miles east of Hallam. I'm a farmer and a fourth-generation farmer in southern Lancaster County. I'm also a landowner in Lancaster County. Mark Hunziker spoke that we're not taking into concern their loss of possible monetary gain. Well, none of this, the people that are in support of this, are taking in consideration my possible monetary gain. Charlotte spoke against that it would be such a small amount, it wouldn't make any difference. That's a load of garbage. I pay property tax in this county of $45,000 on 3 quarters. 27,000 of that goes to North School District. A number of the people that got up and spoke in support of this send their kids to North School District. They do not spend anywhere near that amount of money on property taxes that sends their kids to our local school. wind turbines are estimated to generate about $10,000 per year in income. If I got 4 or 5 of them and all they would do is pay my property taxes that have gone way off the rails, this would make a huge difference in my financial situation. This is my 4th year of not making any money because our prices are so low and our expenses are so high. My wife works 2 jobs and she does not make the amount of money that we would get from 4 or 5 wind turbines. This is a huge thing. Judy Doherty spoke about industrial electrical. Her husband works at Sheldon Station. There's nothing more industrial electrical than that. And Monolith Company is coming and building a big building right south across the road from Sheldon Station. I'm not in opposition to that, but it amazes me how wonderful it is when it supports Hallam or helps the people of Hallam. But by God, if it would help the farmers, that is a horrible, horrible thing. This is simply elimination by overregulation. That's all it is. It's just like the extremely low noise values that were brought up a number of years ago. It's simply elimination by overregulation. My wife is from Burwell, Nebraska. She was out at Broken Bow with some relatives going to Broken Bow. They got stopped on the road because of road construction. There's an installation right by the road. She said, we couldn't even hear them. My cousin, the guy that works with him, he has a wind turbine in the Steel Flats project. They went down to see it. He said, we drove to the base, but we couldn't hear it. This is made up science. This is made up opposite. It's just because they want to come out and live on their postage stamp size of ground, send their kids to North school and not pay any property taxes, and they want to decide what we can do with our property that's been in our family for 50 to 100 years. I'm the 4th generation of people working our tail off in my family to pay for our property and have some property rights, and they seem to all be taken away from us, except the right to pay taxes on them, which has gone off the rails. And our lovely Governor Ricketts has no intention of ever changing anything to do with that. That's, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you. Testimony in opposition?
Sorry, I expected somebody else to be jumping up here, and I wasn't really, thought I'd have to be fighting my way up here, but evidently not. I have copies of my testimony. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name's Ken Winston. I'm representing Nebraska Interfaith Power and Light, and I'm providing you with written testimony, which you'll soon get. And I'm not going to read it to you because obviously you're all literate and you don't need to hear me reading what you can read. But I guess I wanted to focus a little bit about on the first paragraph and the last 2 paragraphs of my testimony. As Mr. Levy indicated, this basically is an attempt to undo what was very recently done. I mean, basically, it's almost like a motion to reconsider what just happened. And basically, it would upend the recently adopted balance between participants and non-participants. And the staff report also opposes the proposal. We're specifically opposed to the 1 mile setback. And then I'd like to, and I've already talked to you about our concerns about climate change and the reason we support renewable energy because of its impacts on climate change. The last 2 paragraphs, I just indicate that we respect the rights of people and the fact that people have the right to have their own views on wind development. However, we ask the Planning Commission to make its decision based on objectively verifiable information. The Health Department extensively examined the potential of negative health impacts related to wind development and concluded that almost all reported negative impacts are related to annoyance, which is a completely subjective standard. So basically what this proposal looks like, it looks like a collateral attack, and that is a legal term, on a decision that's already been made by this body and endorsed by the county board. If adopted, it would establish a precedent for collateral attack on almost any development proposal approved by public officials. If annoyance is the standard and a 1 mile setback is required, the Commission should be prepared for a request for the same setback when you're considering new roads, new neighborhoods, or any other developments that some members of the public find annoying. So for those reasons, we would ask the commission to vote no on the proposal. I'd be glad to answer questions.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is John Hanson, 1305 Plum Street. I am in opposition to the original text proposal. We are in agreement with the staff recommendations. My day job is to be president of the Nebraska Farmers Union. We're the second largest, second oldest farm organization in the state. We've been working on, I've been working on planning and zoning issues for over 40 years. These kinds of regulations go to the heart of working out compromises that work, and in some cases, in my experience, having been through lots of our state's history relative to the conflicts in use, sometimes it's just not possible to make everyone happy. And so what you hope for when you can't make everyone happy is to come up with solutions that are fair and reasonable, still allow for commerce to go on, appropriate citing, the effort to create situations where you're still honoring the principles of being a good neighbor. But I would tell you that being a good neighbor cuts both ways. It's a door that swings in both directions, and at some point you have to try to meet in the middle, and the people have to be willing to give and take in order to make that happen. Being a farm organization, we believe that for farmers to be able to exercise their legal ownership rights over the wind that is above their property is a beneficial use. It's a legitimate economic opportunity. It's primarily an agricultural use by virtue of the fact that it cannot be appropriately or safely sited in urban areas, and that agriculture desperately needs, in the situation that we're in today, to look and utilize every single tool that we can in order to augment our income, keep our family farmers and ranchers in business, and that we live in the margins. On average, 90% of net farm family earned income comes from off-farm jobs. So the last 5 years, it's been even higher than that. USDA predicts that this year that the net return to farm families will be a negative. So when we talk about the opportunity for family farmers to be able, and ranchers to be able to have part-time jobs, which is what these wind turbines represent on their land, this is a positive thing. It's an important thing. It's not a lifesaver for the industry, but it is helpful to those communities where it's possible. There's a lot of communities across the state of Nebraska, as I go across the state and do presentations, that are desperate to have wind developers come to their county. So the fact that you've got a wind company in southern Lancaster County looking at the regulations that we have in Lancaster County, they are, in my opinion, making above and beyond effort to be reasonable, to be flexible. I'm a bit surprised that they're even willing to accept the staff recommendations, but I think it speaks to how far they are willing to go in order to try to be good neighbors and make things work. And so I would suggest to your group, and I appreciate the effort that you put in being in the positions you're in, having been a local public official myself for 14 years, that you support the staff recommendations, and I'd be glad to answer any questions if I could do that.
I don't see any. Thanks.
Thank you, and good luck.
Hello. My name is Russell Miller, 341 South 52nd Street here in Lincoln, Nebraska. As a resident of Lancaster County, I'm in favor of wind farms because of the positive impact it'll have on our air quality and on Lancaster County tax base. Despite the opposition of a small group of county residents, the entire county population will benefit from wind farms, and I hope you consider what is best for all 300,000 of us, our citizens. The first benefit is that the coal-burning electric generation plant located near Hallam will not have to be used as much. In the year 2017, Sheldon, which will be next door to the neighbor to the wind farm, emitted 1,400 tons of nitrogen oxides, 1,900 tons of sulfur dioxide. It is well documented that both of these pollutants are particularly harmful to children under 5 years of age, elderly persons, and all persons with breathing problems. These two pollutants cause or magnify asthma, COPD, and other lung diseases. The second benefit will be for all Lancaster residents because of the increased tax base that wind farms will produce. It is expected that the proposed project like next era will generate about $800,000 in new tax revenue annually. The big winners from these two taxes will be Norris and Crete public schools, which basically receive about 70% of the total assessed taxes. Another one is the rural fire departments will also benefit because they have a separate tax line. County roads is so far down the line it won't be affected too much, but it'll help. The obvious intent of this text amendment is, as proposed by the applicant, is to make it very difficult to have wind farms. This is because of the opposition to towers. It has nothing to do with safety and health. If health was a major concern, they would be agitating against Sheldon and trying to lower the amount of pollution that plant is being put out. I urge this commission to vote against the entire request or accept only the changes as recommended by your staff. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Scheer and Planning Commissioners. My name is Matt Gregory. I'm a clean energy advocate for a couple of organizations, but today I'm representing myself. I stand in opposition to text amendment 18016, specifically the language that would change the setback to 1 mile from the property line for non-participatory landowners. That would essentially kill development for wind in Lancaster County, which I believe is the intention of the amendment. And as been pointed out before, the health and planning departments are in the business of protecting people, hence the measurement to the dwelling and not the property line. When I was here before, I talked about the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Study, that a vast majority of Lancaster County residents would like to see more renewable energy development. Looking at the rest of the state, the rural poll from 2015 showed that 80% agree that more needs to be done to develop wind and solar energy. And you've heard from those who are opposed to wind energy and talk about the noise regulations, but as well as they mentioned these adverse health effects, but there is no peer-reviewed research that is showing any of these kind of effects of ill health effects. The issue before you today is to talk about the noise regulations, and it's about annoyance to the sound. And once again, it depends on who you are. I've previously mentioned a Berkeley lab study, and it's worth noting again. They conducted a national survey of attitudes of wind power on project neighbors, and it looks at the strong correlates to annoyance to wind. And surprisingly, they were not distance to the turbine, age, or chronic health condition. The strongest correlates were your opinion of renewable energy and if you thought that the planning process was fair. So also mentioned, we saw these graphs today, and we talked about, being in the infected area, and so that they can't build something else like a church or a daycare. Well, you can still build those things. One landowner shouldn't have to wait around for another landowner to see what they're going to do. And I'm sure that you can have a daycare and a church, a worship facility in a county, and you will not be affected by wind.
Questions? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lou Nelson. I'm a policy associate with the Center for Rural Affairs. Our address is 145 Main Street, Lyons, Nebraska, 68038. I stand before you, Chairman and Commissioners, in opposition to this amendment, and I would repeat what a lot of other opponents to this amendment have said, but I would rather focus on 2015 when the original standard was formed. I was part of that working group. I was on the working group, and what we kept coming back to was the issue of annoyance, and that was because there was no peer-reviewed research that supported other health impacts. And because of that, we had to keep looking back to how do you reduce annoyance for non-participating landowners. And that's how we got to the noise standard that you have currently in that ordinance for non-participating landowners. And I think you just took important steps at the end of last year to rebalance that standard, to allow landowners to participate in projects, to allow development in the county, and to capture the benefits that have been mentioned by other testifiers here today. I think it's essential to go with either the staff recommendation or reject this amendment entirely. I think it is not in the spirit of that balance. It is certainly focused on eliminating wind energy in the county and stopping any development whatsoever, not on actually protecting landowners. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Questions? Thanks. Testimony in opposition. Okay, it appears we're finished with testimony in opposition. Do we have staff questions?
Yes.
Staff questions, yes.
Including Health Department.
Probably Chris, too. Go ahead.
Okay, I had a couple here. With the current language as it stands, after our last hearing on this, are we the most conservative county in Nebraska as it relates to wind energy? Are we the most restrictive?
I can't say for the entire state. I can say for the 6 or 7 counties I looked at, including the ones close to us, Gage, Saline, Seward.
Would it be fair to say that we are among the most restrictive and conservative counties?
That's probably a safe statement.
Okay. And then I'm also wondering, back to my question about if there was true confusion about who pays for the noise studies. In your suggested language, in the, I'm going to get this terminology, the pre-construction noise monitoring paragraph, you don't specify there who pays for that monitoring. Is that a potential source of confusion as well, or is that different?
I don't think so, because that's a requirement as part of the application. So that has to be done at the original submittal. So that would be part of their application plans, just like any application, any site plans or anything like that is at the applicant's expense. I think the question came into after the fact later on, if there's a complaint or whatever, who pays for the monitoring then?
Gotcha. Okay.
So.
Dick.
Chris, I'm not sure this is accurate, but I've been told by somebody that 50 decibels is like you or I talking with each other on a noise level?
Well, yeah, just general conversation, 50 to 60. But honestly, we don't like to use those comparisons because as we talked about, at the same noise level, wind turbines are perceived as more annoying. So it's not always too good to look at those charts that say, general conversation is 50 to 60 along a roadway, 70 to 80. Again, because of the characteristics of wind turbine noise, it is perceived as more annoying.
Okay, thanks.
Tracy?
If we're going to do post-construction noise testing, or if we have a complaint filed and they go ahead and decide to do a noise test, will the manufacturers or the owner, I shouldn't say the manufacturers, the owners of the project be notified of the testing? Will they know the specific dates that they're going to be tested?
I don't believe so. I mean, that's something that we would contract with a third party, acoustical engineering type firm to conduct that testing. And I mean, I would think, the best practice would be not to inform the wind energy company.
So they really wouldn't have a heads up other to know that, if they're watching what's going on in the county, that they're potentially going to be looked at.
I mean, I suppose that's possible if they see folks setting up test equipment and they are notified of that.
Sure. Thank you.
Testing either during the application process or post, are you confident with how the test results will come back and if there will be any ambiguity that you'll have to deal with, or is that going to be pretty clear data in your mind in terms of how that would be packaged and reported and your ability to evaluate?
So you're asking about pre-construction noise monitoring and post-construction?
Well, obviously there's some testing that is involved during the application process or prior to the application process, correct?
No. Well, I guess so what's before you is they are requesting to require pre-construction noise testing. And we're not supporting that because, again, the intent with that would be to allow higher noise limits above ambient levels, I think 3 decibels above that. So, and then relative to the post-construction noise monitoring, this would all be done through a third party. And of course, we'd have to.
Let me clarify.
I don't understand your question.
I said that wrong in terms of the pre-testing, but the information that you get during the application process to verify the distance that the turbine will be sited from the dwelling. Right. That information is what I'm trying to get at. Is
the pre-construction modeling.
Modeling. I said testing. I meant modeling. Yes.
Yeah. And again, that's something that we have to sign off on the protocol. That's something that we would work with, acoustical engineer, noise engineer to develop that modeling protocol.
Right.
So that's really the first step. And then we would, submit that to, the company or to the third party doing the test. Like, this is what we want to see as far as the results.
What I'm getting at is that there's an argument there that a mile is very easily defined. That's a simple kind of measurement. And what I'm trying to get at is the information that you're going to get from the modeling or testing post, is that as reliable as being able to make that distance?
Well, I'm not going to say they're exactly the same.
They're not. I understand that.
But we are.
But are you confident in?
Yes.
Okay.
Because as talked before, when engineering firms do the pre-construction noise modeling, the results are conservative.
Okay.
And just to describe that, I mean, they're going to predict probably higher noise levels than what would actually be measured to ensure that when these turbines get built, they're going to be in compliance.
Okay.
Once the post-construction testing is done. Because you sure in the heck don't want to build these things and then go to the post-construction noise monitoring, which we support, and then have them be in non-compliance.
Right. Thank you. That answers what I was trying to get at. Any other questions? Okay, thanks. Applicant rebuttal.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, this is not a second bite at any apple. We tried very, very hard to get all these issues considered by both you and the county board when the last text amendment was being processed, and were unsuccessful. And so we had to go back and start over with our own application. This is not a second bite at any apple. It is nothing has been previously decided. The use of the term collateral attack it may be a legal term, and it is, but it is irrelevant to this proceeding. The 1 mile setback that we've been talking about is based on information in the staff report of the November 14th report on the previous text amendment. In that text amendment, reference was made to a study or modeling analysis by Epsilon Associates, and to quote Tom Chayka's staff report, the analysis found that to maintain the 37 dBA required for non-participating dwellings, the turbines would need to be a minimum of 1 mile from the dwelling. So we're taking this information from studies that have been paid for by NextEra. The point that Ann made with the drawings, and I think there was a suggestion that maybe these drawings didn't represent what she said they did, but this drawing, this is a mile from the point of the base of that hypothetical turbine. So we're not talking about a noise level drop off. We're not that naive. We know that these levels are on contours as they extend out from the source. This is the 37 decibel line. And so what happens when you overlay that on participating or non-participating 40-acre parcels, you literally destroy the use of those parcels if you don't measure those contours to the property line. You might have 3 acres, barely, at these corners that might be usable, maybe not, because they might not have sufficient land for setbacks for various uses. But the point is, 90% of that ground is destroyed for the value of the uses that are permitted in the ag district. Another example, the other example that Ann put up here is one where you have half, literally, of 2 side-by-side 80-acre parcels taken out within that 37 decibel line. And for this parcel here, to build a house on that outside the 37 decibel line, which the health department says is the standard for health impacts here, you have to not only build a road that's a 1/4 mile long at least, you may end up having to build a bridge across one of those draws that runs through this piece of property. It has a real impact on the value of property which is not participating. Those people who have chosen not to develop their ground for uses other than agriculture don't necessarily forego the possibility of developing that ground for other uses. It's a very real and potential for significant loss of value, and it's not a matter of making somebody wait till the non-participants decide what they're going to do with their property. It's simply a matter of forcing a developer of an industrial use in an agricultural area to account for the impact that everybody knows is part of the project, that noise. Make them account for it on land which is participating within the project or the surrounding county road rights of way. At least don't force that impact onto non-participants to the extent that they will be affected in the future use of their land. So, this isn't a matter of trying to unbalance the public health, safety, and welfare and the property rights of the non-participating landowners. This is really just the same thing you need to do on every zoning decision you make. and that is to account for the impacts that are being imposed on surrounding properties in ways that make sense and leave those properties with reasonable uses left. Don't allow a project for an industrial use in an agricultural zone to foreclose the possibility of a development on surrounding properties. So I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Questions?
Oh, by the way,
Yes,
I
go.
was told that we didn't ask those Missouri folks to come up here. They came up here on their own after they found out it was on the agenda.
Thanks. Okay, I think we're ready to entertain a motion and discuss.
I will make a motion that we approve the staff recommendations for the 13.048 commercial wind energy conversion system. And then I'll speak to it if we get a second.
Okay.
Second, core.
Okay, discussion.
I think the planning staff has done a good job of looking at all the different proposals that have come forward and integrating those that clarified some things and made things more appropriate. But I am still in favor of the projects and feel that that it is something that can move forward in Lancaster and Gage County, and do not support the more difficult improvements.
Others? Maya?
I'm not going to support the motion not because I think that this is a second bite of the apple or whatever the term was. I think that the applicant is fully has a right to come forward, and I'm happy to do this again next month if that's what it takes. But we have had an extensive process, public input process, as well as extensive hearings that I've been a part of since Oakswind was here originally. And so I feel that I've received a massive amount of input and data to support my original vote. The changes that I would be willing to support are not material, and as a result, I feel like it would almost be an insult to put something forward that clarifies a few things that are implied already, just to kind of get to a compromise that in my mind would be kind of disingenuous on my part, because I'm not willing to support any of the material changes, including the post-construction noise monitoring, mainly because we already have perhaps the most restrictive ordinance, if not the most. It is very conservative already. And I wouldn't be opposed to if a special permit came forward, I could see a reality where if a developer thinks that a post-construction noise study is a good idea to bring goodwill to the project, there's nothing that stops them from making that a voluntary requirement. We've seen that with other special permits where you're basically setting a baseline and you're coming in and you're saying, we're good actors, we will do what's required. But I am fine with my original votes. I've taken 2 on this already, so I'm good where I am.
I know that we did this decision 6 weeks ago, and for that reason, I was a little first concerned that we were going to rehash this. But I believe that the proposal provides some assurances that I think at least I wanted to have in place for protecting non-participating landowners. And for that reason, I will support what is offered by the staff, though if I had jumped on my microphone a little bit faster than Commissioner Campbell, I would have offered to accept one other item that was originally proposed, and that's for monitoring every 2 years. I do believe that post-construction monitoring within the year it's constructed is really important, because models don't always give you what you hope to get at the other end. And so I believe that post-construction modeling is important. I also would want to make clear that my vote for these additional assurances for non-participating landowners really just deals with what I believe is important for Lancaster County. I would not want me to go on the record as saying what I believe might be possible in Gage County. My professional life before I came to the Planning Commission had me commenting greatly and participating greatly in Gage County's wind project, and the impacts of that in Gage County because of a previous job and what I was doing. So I'm not going to negate my previous positions in Gage County, where I was looking for very strict
Amendments are
regs.
possible. If you believe strongly enough, you should.
I believe very strongly that every 2 years.
Are you?
I would ask if Mr. Campbell would take a friendly amendment.
I don't believe, I'll say no, because I don't believe that after they do that first initial test, that the expense of doing it every 2 years is necessary.
Well, then I will, I can still support this, and I will encourage non-participating landowners to be thoughtful but diligent in their own monitoring. And if you believe that there is a complaint necessary, please place it, because I don't want the project to get noisier and noisier and people not feel like they're allowed to complain.
Others? Anyone else?
I just think it's confusing. You are voting, or you have made a motion to accept staff's
Correct.
recommendation. You are voting against it because you don't want either. Is that right?
I don't want either, but I guess it's a good point. Do we need to, do we need to vote to deny the applicants for this motion? No, okay, so, I think
Okay.
you're good, yeah.
Just trying to figure it out.
I don't want either, yeah, I guess that's, yes.
Okay.
You're right.
I'm going to support Mr. Campbell's motion.
And I'm going to support the motion from the things that we've researched prior to, the things that we've talked about in the last. I do believe the 1,000-foot setback to the property line really is is addressing the concerns that we've talked about previously in some of the research that we've done and I have done professionally. And so I am going to support the motion.
Anybody else? Tracy? No?
But what are you talking about, the 1 mile, which?
Because it is already in the language as per the staff recommendation.
Yep, okay.
Okay. Making sure I'm clear, yeah. Okay, good point.
I think that a lot of the, I'm struggling with how to word this. I think a lot of the push for a 1 mile rule is because that's easy to understand and it's easy to interpret and measure. And I think that for everybody, and I think that what we have now is fine. And so I'm going to support Mr. Campbell's motion to approve the staff written thing. I think that it becomes very confusing when we have people not in the industry trying to interpret that, and I can see how that would be very confusing and concerning, but I think that we have something good already, and that's why I'm going to support what staff has proposed.
Yeah, I agree. I would not be in favor of changing the parameter for annoyance, which is noise, to be based on distance instead of sound testing or measurement. So I think what we have is good. Just in terms of context, as Maya said, this is my 3rd time through this too. I voted the first time, 4 years ago, I was not in the majority. I think I said this at our last meeting. Last month, I was in the majority, and I'm going to vote for this motion as well. I think this is a good compromise. I asked Chris the question of whether the health department is confident in being able to evaluate information either from the modeling stage or the post-testing stage. The health department is confident. For me, that's what makes me confident personally that this can work well. So I'm going to vote for the motion. I think we're ready to vote.
Okay, this is for approval of the staff recommended alternative. Campbell?
Yes.
Edgerton?
Yes.
Finnegan?
Yes.
Harris?
No.
Joy?
Yes.
Washington?
Yes.
Core?
Yes.
Shear?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-1.
Okay, at this time, anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda may do so. If not, we are adjourned.